We tend to get a good mixture of current clients, people we've worked with before, and new people, which is fabulous. So today we're going to talk about the impact of creating very meaningful rituals. And in fact, some of you are even people who have worked in some of the organisations I'm going to talk about today, which is wonderful, because it shows the impact of some of the lasting relationships that all of us have created. We're going to be very practical, so we're going to talk you through our culture model and ideas of rituals at each of those stages. There might not be ideas that work perfectly for you and your organisation, but there'll certainly be ideas that you can adapt. And the feedback that we had last time was great in terms of how practical the session was. And as Marianne said, it's really tough talking to a screen, even though I can see some of your wonderful faces. So as much interaction and as many questions as you've got, the better. So thank you for that. My own personal ritual story first was from lockdown, where in particular in that second one over the winter time, in our family, we created a Friday night ritual where we took it in turns to be the head chef. So we went for this every Friday night, and because we didn't have a lot on, we spent quite a lot of time creating menus, buying the ingredients in an online shop because we weren't allowed to leave the house. We all dressed up in something different every week, and it became something that we really looked forward to as a family, and we loved it. And we posted the pictures on Facebook to make us look like a smug family. And interestingly, there was research after that to show that people who did create rituals with their children over that lockdown period felt happier in their parenting. Smug parent post on Facebook. But it got us thinking, that actually we all have rituals in our lives that mean something to us. And in fact, certainly Marianne, Lucy and I, and some of you here have seen rituals in organisations that we still talk about and that still mean something to us. So I'm going to share some slides. And I'm going to talk you through some of our ideas and also a bit of the research. So two things: how to create rituals in a hybrid world, because that's been a big thing. Clients are always saying to us, our rituals have always been about bringing everybody together into one room. What can we do that's much more hybrid focused? So we're going to talk a bit about that. And also how to ensure that the workplace culture through rituals can be reflected in all areas of your customer experience, of your employee experience. So we'll talk a bit about that towards the end. So what is a ritual? I won't read that out for you, but I guess the thing is consistency, something that you repeat. One of the things that I loved that I read was a ritual is about creating a more meaningful moment from an average starting point. They are created with intent and awareness. Many workplaces have their own rituals. Some of the famous ones are Walmart, who start the day with a group get together and a cheer before they start work. Some of us have done that in previous lives. At Yelp, sales are marked with a gong. And at Virgin Mobile Australia, where I worked with Marianne, on a Thursday afternoon, we would play corridor cricket every week, and then we would go out for drinks. And in fact, that's just a really interesting point. Certainly in the UK, and certainly at the beginning of my career, rituals were created around Friday night drinks. And in fact, the more work we do on ED&I, the more people say to us, I feel excluded when the rituals are only driven around alcohol. So we thought that was a really, really interesting. And I think it happens less and less, but it's worth noting that again, there is more to rituals now than a Friday night drink. And certainly as I look around this virtual room, many of us did that a lot early on in our career. So I would love for you to comment in the chat around any rituals that you have either in your own organisation or in fact that you have had in previous organisations, just so that rather than just looking at our examples, we can get some ideas from around the table. So Michael Norton is probably the most prominent behavioural scientist. And his view is that in every culture and throughout history, people who perform rituals report feeling better. And that's not just organisationally, it's throughout people's lives. He looks at things like the haka. He looks at things like funerals and the way that we ceremoniously say goodbye to people in different cultures. But a lot of the research translates directly into the workplace. And in fact, some of the there's some lovely research out there. And we had to refresh ourselves with that to write this and to write the brochure that we've written, that Marianne will give you the link to later. And the research does show that it does increase team bonds and boost performance. So with somebody who's on the chat today, one of the things that we used to do was we had what we called a quack, which was a quarterly action check. And we did it every quarter without fail. And each of us had to bring our own view of where we were against our plan. And actually, it was one of the only times we did get together. And at the time, we were all in person, because many of our people worked remotely across the country. And it did increase our team bond. And actually, it gave a level of exposure to where everybody was across that team. And therefore, people were very accountable for the performance that they brought into that session. It was also quite fun, quite loud. The research shows it does increase meaningful work and organisational citizenship behaviours, and identified the psychological underpinnings that lead to increased immersion in experiences, greater feeling of control because people know what's coming, they know these rituals that make them feel safe, reduced anxiety, and increased liking for teammates, because generally you get to know people on a more human level. So we've referenced that research, and we're very happy to put that in the chat or send it out subsequently, because it's really useful and interesting. So why do we think that rituals are helpful in embedding culture? Many of you will have seen this. This is the Flint culture model. It is developed from an academic model, but we have some additional quite pragmatic, practical elements to it, including things like ways of working. And today I'll talk you through rituals within each of these elements of the culture model. They're fairly self-explanatory. Clarity of purpose is obviously the first point, that is being really clear that people understand where the organization's going. And much of the rest of it falls out of the way that you align that purpose into each individual. You'll see that through the middle of that model is leadership. And of course, that is a great place for rituals to start. But equally, some rituals happen amongst teams, and in fact can be just as powerful and purposeful. So as leaders, we see it as our role. And in fact, I think it should be a key part of creating that team strength. But equally, if your team start rituals without you, that's good too, providing that they're positive. So I'm going to talk you, oh, hi, Maz.
I was just going to say, Sarah's shared with me in the chat that they have a couple of rituals. So I thought it was relevant. One is a start the week session, and the other one is a thank you Thursday.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So start the week, I'm guessing, gives you all an opportunity to align on what you're all doing that week, and make sure that everybody's working on similar things, working at the same pace on things. Love it. And thank you Thursday is something we have a similar idea in here. Actually, we call it the small moments jar. But again, we don't celebrate enough. We don't thank people enough. And again, there is significant amounts of research that show that just by saying thank you, in particular when it's personalized, has massive impact on motivation and engagement. So thank you, Sarah. Do let me know if there's some more. So within the rituals element is one part of our culture wheel, and obviously it's the one we're focusing on today, and it's the one that people ask us the most questions about because they find it the most difficult. And I think, you know, many of the organizations that you might have worked for have long histories, and people become connected to those histories, or connected to the purpose of that organization, or connected to the customers within that organization. And this part of the culture wheel is about really bringing those to life, to connect people back into that organization. For us, there's a huge amount in there around storytelling. So many leaders persuade with facts and figures. And of course, that has a massive relevance in business today. But there are other ways to persuade people as well. And sometimes a much more powerful way, which is uniting an idea with an emotion. And essentially, when we do that, we connect to the prefrontal cortex. So we connect with people on a much more emotional level. And it brings out something in each of us as an individual. So the prefrontal cortex sparks tension. So if the story has some tension, it keeps people wanting more. It gets them to wait for the next series of that ritual. It impacts our decision making, which subsequently spurs action, which is what we want people within businesses to do. And it connects to the empathy element of us, which helps people to care about the organisation. So by bringing your own story to support and explore things with your team, it connects people on quite a different level. And we're going to sort of talk through different, very practical ways of managing that as we go through. So this is a really important one to Flint, ways of working. So this is quite unique in a culture element. And for us, you can put your values or your culture on a big poster and you can say, this is what is important to our organisation. The point to us is that if you are working as a zookeeper and the value is the well-being of our animals, but actually you don't see that in the day-to-day life of what you do, and you feel that the well-being of animals is not the priority in this organisation, then subsequently you won't believe that that culture is relevant, or that the organisation is serious enough about it. Another example is in, say, infection control in a hospital, where the organisation might say our absolute priority is reducing infections and the safety of our patients, but actually you've only given me 45 minutes to clean that ward as part of my targets, but the chemicals take 2 hours. So therefore, I don't fundamentally believe in the way that I work that this culture and these values are relevant to me. So a big part of what we do is trying to impact that culture at a very individual process level. So one idea of a ritual within that is a customer chair. So this came from Nissan Motors, and there is a customer chair in all of their meeting rooms. And it reminds everybody that when decisions are taken, they have to be relevant, add value to, empathetic with, and compassionate with customers. So it essentially constantly puts the customer at the heart of the decisions that they make. Some of them sit down in the chair and ask questions, challenge around what that customer voice might be. And I think for us, we love this one because we're all from a customer experience background. It's really minor. It's not a lot of cost, but it is constant. And we've seen this with a big red chair as well that is also in our rituals handbook. So really simple, but all about keeping the customer at the heart of the organisation, and a fun ritual that generally people love. The other elements that have come up for us, one example in the Rituals for Work book is a guy who ran an away day for his sales team every year. So it's quite a well-known thing in organisations. They would meet every year in a very kind of classy hotel. It would be quite lavish, all the team. There would be awards, and they would talk through some of those key operational pieces, or things that maybe where customers were being failed. And they would have these great ideas, and they would leave that away day feeling really pumped. Yeah, these are the things that we're going to put right. We're going to go back into the organisation with. And the MD noticed that they would leave those sales meetings and nothing would change as a result, because actually they weren't out then engaging the operations team to make that different. So he changed the whole approach, and all of the sales team went on a road trip for their away day. So they still had their awards, they still had their time working through what was next, but they did it at various retail places for the organisation. So they met operations teams, they understood the customer anger at lack of refunds, they heard what the customer wanted in that particular locality and what frustrated that retail team. So subsequently, the retail and operations teams were much more engaged. They didn't see this as a sales jolly. Many of us would have heard that before and experienced that before, maybe. And it was a great way then of connecting into those operations teams. So when they went back into the organisation to sell those ideas, the ideas had come from the operations team, come from the retail team, and their voice had been heard. So we loved that one. Innovation stations. So we recently worked with a trading organisation. Innovation was one of their key values. So they set up innovation stations within the organisation, and where they needed a new idea, they all went into, it's kind of a wooden hut set up within with some fancy lights. And it was a place where people went to have time. And in fact, on the last webinar, we had somebody who talked a lot about the Google innovation, where they have a percentage of their week where they're allowed to spend on innovation, on things that the customers might want. Another great idea. So I don't know if Lucy is able to come off of mute. If she's not, I will describe it. She is great. So I'm going to get Lucy to describe the green light meeting, which we've recently put into place for a client.
Yes, I can do that. So thanks, Alex. So we worked with a client about a year ago. And the green light meeting is almost the opposite of the innovation station. And this client was a very small entrepreneurial ideation lab, effectively, where the owner and founder pumped a huge amount of money into a small team of entrepreneurs with the sole purpose that they would come up with a million business ideas, looking for the unicorn to make everybody their billions of pounds, or dollars as it was. So how this emanated in the culture was that they did a lot of ideation. There were lots and lots of ideas, no shortage of ideas, but every time one of the entrepreneurs started to implement one of them and create a business, the founder would say, I don't like it. I don't want to go with it. I don't want to carry on. And this caused a problem that it was basically stagnating. So what we did was, what is very familiar to a lot of us in the corporate world, was put in a monthly meeting. And we called this the green light meeting. And this was the environment where the entrepreneurs had to present their business cases with a thought out financial plan and a marketing plan and how exactly their idea would work. And the founder would have to say yes or no. And if he said yes, they would get the backing and the money to go ahead and do it. So he couldn't then stop it until the next review period. So it sounds very basic, but in terms of putting in a basic structure within a very chaotic, creative, innovative organization, it really worked a treat. So it's an example of fitting your way of working and your ritual to the environment that you're in and the kind of people that you're in.
Thank you. Lucy's much better explaining that than me. Fabulous. Thank you. So next one that Flint are really, we think is really important is measures and goals. And for us, we regularly go into organizations where you'll have one set of people who are measured by something that conflicts with something that the next department are measured by. And for us, it's always a massive learning and a massive opportunity to align either through the customer or the employee experience. So a couple of examples of rituals here. One is speed dating. So we went into a large NHS trust and we got them to do their speed dating against their plan, so against their kind of functional plans for the year. And actually, when everybody had met, so it gave up an opportunity for clinical to say to the tech team, within my plan is 3 elements that are going to require tech support. One of them was digitalization of minutes, so that the clinician spoke into a dictaphone, essentially. I'm sure it wasn't called that. I'm sure that's something from the 1950s, and it would have been something exciting and technical. And then it automatically typed it. It was proofread, and then it went into the patient's notes. And actually, when we finished the day of speed dating, we found out that tech had 80 projects that fell out of that speed dating process. And in fact, they only had the resources to do 8. So this is a really lovely way, A, of getting your teams together, getting them to get to know each other better. But probably more importantly, that connection around, this is what I need to do. You're my stakeholder for that. Do the 2 work together? And it really starts to align then the goals of each function and what each of us are measured by, because we all have our own agenda. And at the moment, we're working with a different trading company where a lot of the measures link to very personal, quite significant reward. And therefore, they are very driven by getting that created. Whereas the next person who is accountable for delivering part of it might be much less driven because their bonus is driven by something different. So again, it's a really easy one, lovely way of bringing people together. You can do it beautifully remotely, so it really works with hybrid teams. And And we've also used it for projects or transformations where there are blockers, and trying to kind of bring teams together to understand, well, I feel like I'm doing my bit, but I don't feel like you're doing your bit. And somebody else tends to say, well, we feel the same. So we bring people together in that environment. So values, we do lots of values work, either by embedding values that have previously sat on a poster for many, many years and meant nothing to people, or indeed setting up values. And we feel really, really strongly that these need to be lived out in an organisation for them to be of any value at all. I think if you're going to have values and pop them on a poster and never mention them, I probably wouldn't bother having them. It's just probably easier for everybody. So we do lots of work around values being created. We do playbooks, lots of video work around helping people to understand. We have values ambassadors, people who champion those values within the organisation, so that it's very much an employee voice around what those values mean to people. But actually, we work with some lovely rituals around values. And again, to make values real and interesting to the organisation, it becomes fundamental to have rituals repeatedly sustaining and reinforcing those messages. So a few on here. One is a spotlight on values for all new starters to include skills. So we ran a session today with a client who the value is around open and honest conversations, transparency, trust. So we ran a workshop that talked about what we meant by that. So we define it, we have clarity on what we mean. And then we ran some skills-based training within it. So giving people frameworks within which they can be open and honest. We use a wonderful model called Radical Candor, which many of you will know, by Kim Scott, to help people to understand how to challenge people directly, but also be very caring in their communication. So it's it happens for every value, it's repeated regularly, but it also goes out to all new starters. So it's a really nice ritual that they run. Community conversations. So this is also in the Rituals for Work book, and it's from a business where they really wanted transparency to be a key value for them. So the way that they managed that was anything that they heard within the organisation that was starting to bubble, become a bit toxic. So one of the examples was we changed the bonus where now we're asking people to pay their own NI. Years ago, we used to not pay it, but actually we've had to change it now. And that kind of rumbled through the organisation, as you can imagine. So the MD brings people together in a community and they have a very open conversation. And he says, look, I'm conscious that this is an issue. Within our boundaries of constructive conversations, I'd really like you to talk to me about, you know, what the problem is, how people are feeling about it. And it gives him the right to reply. So it gives him the opportunity to say the intent behind it was this, the context behind it was this is the why. But it also gets stuff out on the table, which we loved. My first failure book was also from the book, and every new starter in this organisation was given a My First Failure book. And obviously one of their values was fail fast. And obviously they were trying to encourage people to say, I either made this mistake or I made a near mistake, and to document it. And then they would subsequently share it with colleagues in a group, environment. And they would also share it with new colleagues. So this was the mistake I made when I got here. So it helps sharing of mistakes, but it also recognizes and rewards almost that fail fast type of process. Small moments jar, I think similar to Sarah's Thank You Thursday, you tend to take any small element of thanks and it all goes into the jar and it's pulled out once a week, and just tiny points, tiny habits, small things that give us a moment to say thank you to each other. I'm going to do walk and talk first. So the walk and talk was one that I actually was introduced to me when I was an exec at Miele. And sometimes when you need to have a more constructive conversation with a colleague, the sort of sitting down in quite a stuffy environment can be can be a harder conversation to do, that eyeball sitting in front of each other, you know, like when your eyes start to go a bit funny and your neck goes a bit red. And our coach encouraged us to walk and talk. So at the start of every one of our exec meetings, we would pick somebody to walk and talk, and we would either give praise or we would give some constructive criticism. Either way, for us, it would be something that it became a ritual, and it was refreshing, and it got my steps up, and you know, it became a way of learning about my colleagues. The legends, Lucy, are you? Yes, thanks.
I can mention that. And actually, Trevor is on the line. He might remember this from back in the day at Vodafone, but it was an annual reward program. It was voted for by all employees, and you would nominate particular people across your business for going over and above their job role. And it was to do stuff. It wasn't just being good at their job. It was to be really off the scale on their job and contributing far above what you would expect. So it was a really big deal in Vodafone back in the day. Is that how you remember it, Trevor?
Yeah, it was the above and beyond reward, wasn't it? Basically.
Yeah, it's great. And again, you know, we're all up for that kind of gimmicky, you know, the legends. It becomes so so easy to remember. I think that was the same with Quack at Milo. It just became something that you know, certainly for me, I'll always remember. So communication, this is an obvious one. And you know, I think in particular, as we've gone into this hybrid world, I think some organizations are not quite as innovative, perhaps, as they could now be. So the example that we're going to give you, and there are lots around communication. I mean, again, with Marianne and Lucy, and I'm hoping with Sarah as well. And we had other merchants people on our last webinar, actually, where every Friday night, the MD of the organization used to communicate with us. We would all go to the top floor of this of the building, and he would come out and it would be the thank yous. It would be what's happened, what have we won, what's on next week. And it was, you know, it created a community, and it was a ritual that we looked forward to every week without fail. And all of us remember it. And in fact, you know, many of us kind of still working together, and we were talking last time about the community that organization created with some of the rituals that it brought us. The example we're going to give you is we're working with one of the trading clients. They are global. They have acquired many businesses across the globe, and they're very fast growing. And one of the issues that the client had was that they would communicate out into a black hole. So they tried lots of different things. They tried newsletters, they tried emails, they tried town halls, and essentially nothing was getting them any feedback. And they were starting to become quite dejected, I guess. And actually for two of the exec, they basically said, we're just going to stop because nobody's interested in the communication. And in fact, we did the culture audit, and people said, we really want to be communicated to. We're not communicated to enough. We want to know more. So we set up what we called Amias Live, global live sessions every month. The time is at 1:45. And the reason for that is it's a trading window around the world. And actually the Singaporean colleagues, they are the ones who do come late, and so there is a set of kind of rituals that they have. So we ask them if they want to go out for dinner, and there is a number of kind of small things that we do for them on the evenings that we ask them to stay. For everybody else, it's kind of between I think kind of 8 o'clock in the morning and but it's 1:45 in London. We update them on the strategy and the values. There are different speakers from different parts of the organization, from different continents within the organization. And then we stop and we put everybody into breakout rooms. And everybody has the same questions, 2 or 3 questions around the content and around what's going on in the organization. It's a little bit of community conversation. So there's some, one of their values is transparency and creating trust. So there is a little bit of the community conversation we talked around earlier, which is, you know, how is everybody? Is there anything anybody wants to tell us that we can do differently? And then there's questions on the content, not to test them, but to get their voice, to hear their voice and to get their view. And I think we've only run about 4 or 5, but it's been an absolute game changer. We have literally had to close the breakout groups down because they would have kept chatting. And in fact, we only have this kind of hour window before the trading starts again. And we have taken all of the feedback that comes out of those groups, they get written up and they get sent back out with answers. So if there's key questions that come out, the answers go back in. And that is followed up with a newsletter where everybody then gets the content written down. So for those of us with different learning requirements, they then have that written down in a PDF form. It's really basic. It works for a hybrid organisation, and it has created a much stronger sense of community for them. And it's really impacted engagement in a very positive way. Okay. So this kind of last piece really is to ensure that as your employees work their way through their employee experience, there are rituals that can support each of those. So attraction is about ensuring that people know about the kinds of rituals the organisation has so that you give a clue as to what that culture looks and feels like. Recruitment and selection. In Virgin Mobile, everybody came in and sat on blow-up sofas. There was lava lamps everywhere, and the assessments were very high energy, lots of fun. And so that was really about kind of creating something in recruitment that talked about who that brand was. And that was then rolled straight into induction. So as soon as they started, they had that same feeling all the way through the organisation. A couple of other lovely induction ideas. One is Mars, who send out their welcome box with goodies, Mars goodies, water bottles, notes. I think this is becoming something organisations do more and more, but it's a really lovely way of introducing and welcoming people. The other ones that we like are the treasure hunt. So the new starter gets a treasure hunt pack and they work their way around the organisation answering key questions. And they are told kind of where to go and who to ask that particular question. But it means that they then go and meet Bob in finance. Bob knows the question he's going to be asked and he knows the information that he needs to. And it just means that they meet them on a much more kind of independent rather than meet, oh, hi, Bob, meet Naomi. They go, oh, hi, like that. And then they forget each other's names. It's a much more kind of independent, much more fun way of doing it. Crash the desk, either as objects, so people bring in an object, they crash the desk of the new starter at lunchtime, and they have to describe why they bought that object and why it's relevant to them. Or indeed, they just crash the desk with their lunch and they all meet that new starter in a very, very informal way. Just a couple of others that aren't necessarily induction, but that we have loved would be a goodbye ceremony for a project, way or working or a behaviour that is no longer relevant. So when in some of the research, they actually have had funerals for behaviours that they want to say goodbye to within an organisation. I've not written that in here because we're not totally sure if that's appropriate, but you know, the goodbye ceremony is kind of another way of managing that, which we really liked. And the welcome ceremony, which we love. So we do some work around acquisitions and connecting cultures. And the welcome ceremony brings the two cultures together. And it enables people to describe what their culture is, to understand what the other culture is, and understand the kind of ways that they can connect those two cultures together. So they can talk about what's important. And in some of the examples they had singing, it was like a full ceremony. Lovely if you're a singing kind of organisation. And in fact, you know, in particular with some of the behaviours, so the community conversations, if there is something that people within the organisation say, you know, this needs to go, it's toxic, the goodbye ceremony is like a really kind of fun but very clear way of saying this is no longer okay within our organisation, which we loved. So I won't talk a huge amount more around each of those, but I think, you know, that there are ways certainly within progression and performance. So, you know, most of the clients we work with, we are now helping them to move to at least a quarterly performance piece that connects into values. And that actually can be a ritual in itself, providing that it's well supported and managers are clear on what needs to happen. But there's also things like, so the quack that I talked about earlier, we used to have a WAG, a weekly action group, a MOM, a monthly operational meeting, a quack, quarterly action check, and an ARMS, which is an annual roadmap strategy day. And that was a kind of way of reviewing performance on a team level too, that and they very much became rituals. I guess one point just to note is that there can be rituals that are toxic. So, Lucy talks on occasion about, in her sales days where the micromanagement of sales figures at 9 o'clock every morning, there are equally, it's worth considering the rituals that you have within your organization and just considering, is this a positive? Does it reinforce a behavior that we want it to do? Just kind of a point to note, really. So as I start to bring us to a close and see if you have any questions, so I have talked at you a lot. A little bit of a kind of practical guide, so ways of making a start. So do start by looking at anything that already exists. So any relevant ways of bringing your culture to life. So if you already have team meetings, can you make them slightly more exciting, slightly more innovative, slightly more inspiring? If those people are coming together in that environment already, you don't need to overwhelm them with another meeting. Be clear on what you're trying to achieve. Design rituals that celebrate the impact or behavior that you want to reward. So if I go back, it's because I can see Steve on the screen right in front of me and have done the whole session. If I go back to that Mila quack and the WAG, for us, what we were trying to achieve was more pace in delivery of those objectives. So by having these very regular reviews, making them very high energy, very fun, actually people had no choice but to come at the end of that quarter with where they'd got to. Be aware that they can have a negative impact. So again, we get lots of feedback in the DE&I work around rituals around alcohol. We had somebody say to us recently that, they bought me a bottle of champagne to say thank you. I am a recovering alcoholic. So, there is some stuff to be really aware of around the inclusivity of your rituals and making sure that they do work for that whole team. And equally, don't overwhelm people. So it's a really lovely idea to start hundreds of rituals, but to go right back to the beginning, they need to be repeatable and sustainable. And if they're not, actually, it's just kind of having a fun week of 3 new rituals that you'll never do again. And the energy around rituals is the sustainability of them. It's keeping them going and keeping them positive. So, Maz, I can see some points on the chat, so I will conclude and then see if there's anything to note. So I guess to conclude, it sets up a really nice, clear path for people to follow. And lots of our research in the psychology space is around people having those boundaries. I think we've talked before, for those of you who've been to our webinars before, about the dance floor, setting the boundaries and letting people dance within them however they want to. That rituals is a great way of doing that. They create a sense of belonging. When I think back to some of the organizations that I've worked with some of you guys in, I absolutely felt like I belonged at that time. And for me, they bring back such strong and fond memories. Safe space to experiment. In particular, if you've got strong psychological safety in your team, that leads to innovation. And so creating rituals that provide that safe space is a great thing to do. They embed all areas of the culture wheel. So you get a really holistic approach then to embedding each elements of the culture. And we think they set your organization apart. Things like some of the examples that we've given you are, we've always contacted the owner to be clear if we found them. We're not just repeating them. And, that's the kind of thing that goes on LinkedIn that people love, and it starts to create your employer value proposition and your employer brand. But the repetition is key. So fundamental then to keep them going, because otherwise they're just a fun day out once. I have talked a lot at you. I am going to stop. I'm very grateful for you listening so intently, and perhaps we'll see if there's anything useful on the chat.
I was just gonna, I couldn't find the right opportunity to interrupt you, so I'm sorry. There were a couple of
talk so much.
There are a couple of other rituals, some shared with me direct and some in the chat. So there was one about Samina was saying that they start every team meeting by sharing a fun, non-work related question.
Love.
And I replied that on a recent project meeting, we started by asking everybody to share an interesting fact about the place that they lived.
And in fact,
progressed.
Yeah, with the client that Lucy talked about earlier with the green light meeting, they started every meeting with something positive that happened to you as an individual that week. Really nice, really nice.
And another example that was sent to me was about every town hall starts with a client value moment.
Lovely. Mm-hmm. So with the trading company, one of the things they trade is cocoa, and they trade with a very large, very well-known chocolate brand, and they got them in to share their values too, so that they understood the way that the two linked. So again, bringing that kind of client element in is great. Really like that.
So I was just going to wrap up and ask if there were any more questions. I haven't had any more come in via direct messages or in the chat, so I was just going to see if anyone had anything. No, so I was just going to say, Alex mentioned it a few times. I've posted a few links into the chat. So the first one is the link to our rituals handout. So please do go and have a look at that and download that. We're also quite active on LinkedIn, so I've probably spammed you a little bit with our page link, and also to each of us individually. And then I've also popped in a link if you'd like to sign up to our newsletter. So we share a monthly newsletter with lots of updates, new reads that we've come across. So a lot of the books and articles that Alex has referenced, we often share in our newsletter, as well as a lot more. So I think the final thing for me to say is that if you would like to find out a little bit more about what Alex has been sharing today and how we could perhaps help you in your organisation, then do please set up a discovery call with us. Alex has shared her email address on the screen there. And that would be fabulous to find out how we could perhaps help you with your challenges. And I will just end by saying thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure.
It has.